Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. In this episode, I'll be discussing problematic grass weeds for tillage farmers with Jimmy Staples, project manager of the ECT project in Teagasc. I first asked Jimmy about the major problematic weeds and how frequently do they occur in Ireland.
Look, I suppose every farm probably has grass weeds in some way, shape or form. So what I've sort of seen in maybe the last 18 months or so, I think they've become, not that they've become more prevalent, I think people are becoming more aware of them and they're starting to notice them more. And as a result, we're hearing a bit more about them, particularly the sort of the likes of your blackgrass and your sterile brome. I suppose a lot of that might have been brought around by the drought in 18, where we had a very good back end. We had an increase in winter planting. We had earlier sowing dates, and we had an increase in the area winter barley as well. So that's sort of I think that's definitely they've definitely become more prominent since then, I think. But I suppose they're always around in some way, shape, or form.
So the earlier sowing enabled more of those grass weeds to germinate a bit earlier, and we've seen a little bit more than then coming into 2019. Is that the case?
Exactly, yeah. So if you look at if you look at the characteristics of the likes of sterile brome or the likes of blackgrass, their main germination period would be from probably mid-August into early October for brome and into the middle of October for brome. So with the really good back end we had that year, we had a lot of earlier sowing. And so that window was exactly when these weeds wanted to emerge. So you were sowing at a time to favour their emergence, and I think consequently we had an increase in the amount of them around. The dry summer as well, we had a very warm, dry summer, and that would probably have reduced the amount of dormancy, which would have resulted in an increase in the amount of weeds that would have emerged in the crops.
So you mentioned a couple of those weeds, the sterile brome and even blackgrass there, and you say it's maybe not necessarily that they become more frequent, but maybe people are become more aware of them. But is there a number of farms or is there farmer actions that they're doing on the ground which are, if you like, exacerbating or increasing the level of those weeds in their farms?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should really be asking ourselves, like, why are these weeds in our farms, or why are they a problem? And a lot of it comes down to management and the different management activities that go on from year to year. So you sort of wonder, why is blackgrass becoming a problem, or why are wild oats becoming a problem, or why is sterile brome becoming a problem? And really comes back to there is definitely a lack of awareness around the identification and the understanding of these weeds. How they grow through the season, the different timings of emergence, when do they flower, when do they set seed, and things like that. So if people aren't really aware of those things, and especially identification is really key when it comes to control, they're not aware of these things, they could be doing a lot of different. The way they manage their farm or their crops could be actually, playing into the hands of the weeds, into their strong points, if you know what I mean.
So guys, I suppose, are maybe become, would complacent be the wrong word, or maybe they're becoming over reliant on the likes of herbicides or rotations that mightn't have been that wonderful. Is that the kind of case, or is it more a case that they've just been misidentifying them over the years and maybe applying the wrong treatments, whether it happens to be a rotation or lack of it, or a herbicide or lack of it?
I would say it's probably a combination. So, like, we do have a number of cases where misidentification has led to what was probably started off as a small issue, in a rogable sense, ended up being a big issue 2-3 years later, because people weren't able to identify it and they didn't implement the right actions at that stage. But then rotations, probably maybe we're a little bit limited in our rotation options here. There's still a lot of continuous spring barley and a lot of continuous winter wheat. Like, they will have, spring barley, you're looking at those spring germinating weeds that will start to proliferate in those situations, and in winter cropping situations where you've continuous cereals, you get your likes of your brome and the blackgrass as well. And then again, the herbicides thing, we've lost a lot of different herbicides in the last number of years, and what herbicides we have, they're not always fully effective either. Like, you'll get a certain percentage of control, but a lot of them won't claim to get full control either. And there's an over-reliance. If you're in a continuous cereal or a continuous cropping situation, you're over-relying on a certain herbicide as well, and that's going to lead to reduced effectiveness and eventually herbicide resistance, which puts you in a far gives you a far bigger problem when it comes to control.
Okay, so just maybe we might just focus maybe on one of the, I suppose, major weeds out there, which is wild oats. And I think the last estimation I've seen is that it was present on about 80% of the farms across the country. So I suppose every farmer kind of knows about it, or certainly can see it as he's traveling the roads. I think there's certainly a lot of people are applying herbicides for it, but is it just as simple as applying a herbicide, kind of saying that'll be job done and away I go?
No, it's not. To be frank about it, like really, you're looking at you really need to think about your integrated pest management strategy. So the first thing there is you get out and walk your crops and try and see what the level of weeds is. Does it warrant a herbicide? I suppose a lot of people would have been just going and prophylactically spraying uh, a wild oat spray, for instance, and maybe the case is that they actually don't need to know it, but unless they're actually in their crops, there's no way of knowing that. So again, when you're applying a herbicide, that is part of your integrated pest management strategy. You're applying a targeted herbicide to hit a target weed. But again, it comes back to best practice around spraying. So are you using adequate rates? Are you using enough water? Are you spraying the weed at the right time, at the right growth stage? What's the growth stage of the crop? What are the weather conditions like? Temperatures day and night, either side, 2 to 3 days either side of being sprayed. So all those things need to be taken into consideration as well. And you also need to get out and water crop afterwards to see how effective that herbicide was.
I was going to ask you that, Jimmy. In terms of control, what sort of level of control should a farmer say if he got everything right that you're talking about, that the water level was good and the temperature was good and the rate was good and the plant was at the right stage? If he got everything right, what sort of level of control should he expect?
I think 97 to 98% control. I think a lot of the herbicide companies would probably claim that when you're hitting the target weed that herbicide is supposed to be controlling. But even at that's a very good control. But you're going to be left with a certain number of weeds left afterwards, and those weeds are as important as the ones that were controlled as well. So you need to get out and see what's going on. If you do get that level of control and you do have a couple of weeds left, like they should be rogued out of it, because if they've after received a spray and they haven't been controlled, what you're doing, if you leave them, you're basically selecting for resistance, because they're going to set seed. You're going to have a number of those progeny plants coming back in the following season. They're potentially going to be less susceptible to the herbicide that's sprayed on them. And over time, you're um, looking at herbicide resistance developing within that population. So it's very important that even after spraying, you get out and you see what's going on and see how well the control has been, and do you need to follow on with alternative actions afterwards in order to prevent seed return.
Okay, and let's just say a grower has done all of that. He's got the control really good. He's done a bit of hand rogan, but he's been out there doing that for the past maybe say 10 years. It's costing him, I don't know, probably 12 to 20 euros an acre pretty much every year. Quite a big cost. And he's kind of saying, well, do I need to continue to spray? How does he transition from I suppose spraying every acre to not spraying at all and back to maybe hand rogan?
Yeah, I suppose, look, it comes back to the integrated pest management. Being in your crops, seeing what's going on, seeing what's coming in the crop. If it's spring barley, getting out, getting down, see what level of wild oats is there. Maybe taking a test area or doing maybe a tramline trial, or an area that's fairly representative of the field or the farm, but again, an area that's not so big that if you don't get that, if you do have wild oats coming, you're not able to rogue it. So doing little on farm trials within specific fields. Like, farmers probably for the most part know their fields very well, and should have a good idea of what the range of weeds is in them. So that would be, for me, that would be the main thing. Again, getting out, walking crops, seeing what's there, doing little on-farm trials to try and improve your knowledge about what's going on the ground, and doing it that way.
So the key there is probably to not go full out and say I'm just not going to spray it at all this year. It's more a case of test out small bits, maybe in 2 or 3 different parts of the field, and that might be manageable to be hand rogued if needed. But to continue spraying until you kind of build up the confidence that you can leave your wild oat herbicides off it altogether.
Absolutely, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the other major weed that you mentioned earlier is blackgrass. Obviously, that's a huge weed in the UK. It's costing, I think the last figure I seen was something over £200 million a year by the UK farmer to try and control blackgrass, of which has now become very difficult to control in the UK. It's becoming more frequent in Ireland. How more frequent is it? And if a guy has it, should he worry?
Yeah, I suppose it definitely is becoming more common. To date, to the best of my knowledge, I suppose at the last count, we probably had upwards of 40 plus cases that we knew of that people were engaging with Teagasc. But I think there's this perceived stigma around blackgrass, and if I had it, what am I doing? And maybe I'm a bad farmer or whatever, which is not the case. So I think there's probably a lot of underreporting going on. And I think those cases where it's not been identified, or where it's not, or people aren't maybe putting in the action to control it, that's where things can start to get out of hand a bit. So there's a bit of that. Um, it's We also have, I suppose I would say it's probably it's definitely in 90% of the counties that we would class as tillage counties or arable counties within the country. I think there's only two that I'm aware of that I haven't heard of blackgrass being identified in, but that's not to say they're not there. So it has become, I don't want to use the word widespread, but it's definitely more prominent than what it was a couple of years ago.
So where a farmer suspects it's on his farm, what action should he take?
Um, so if you were to take it at this stage now, blackgrass will start to flower in April. So we're in the middle of May now. So blackgrass will be coming to the end of flowering, and it'll potentially be starting to set seed in the head in the next couple of weeks. So um, preventing seed return is the most crucial thing now at this stage of the year. So you're looking at where you have a small patch hand rogan, and that could take 2, 3, 4 passes in order to make sure you get all of them, or where you have a large infestation, you're looking at crop destruction.
And crop destruction, that sounds quite drastic. Is there, as in you're talking about what, going in with a mower, or taking it off for whole crop, or are you just talking about Roundup? I mean, it sounds quite drastic.
It is drastic, but I think we need to look at this. We're in quite a good situation when it comes to blackgrass. That we know what the situation is in the UK. We know the weed is here. We know a lot about it. We know how to manage it. But early identification is key. So if you have a large infestation, the potential for seed return there is phenomenal. So you need to ensure, absolutely should be a zero tolerance approach taken, ensure that there's no seed return to cause a problem in the following year. So crop destruction, whether you just round up the whole lot of it, or round up that patch, or if it's 2, 3, 4, 5 acres, whatever it is, you can round up it. If you're looking for whole crop, you're probably a bit early for a whole crop now at this stage. It's probably not it's not a viable option. You could mow it and bale it over as well, but just preventing seed return is absolutely critical at this stage. I don't think we should be taking any. We should be really looking at this a zero tolerance approach to it.
And for a guy who has a really bad field or number of fields in it, is there is it just I stop the seed setting for this year and I'm good to go, or does he need to put in a kind of a longer term plan?
Yeah, so your vigilance, I suppose, is key now. Like once you've identified that you have blackgrass, stopping seed return is key now. Then you also have to, so going forward, you need to sort of think about what you're doing on the farm. So rotation is obviously key. Rotating between cereal and break crops, using spring cropping as well is also a key thing. Looking at your cultivation practices potentially. It's depending on what your cultivation practice is. How you have to decide how is the seed spread through the soil profile. So you need to try and gather a bit of information together, and then put a plan in place. So if you're going with autumn cropping, you're looking at pushing back your sowing dates. You're looking at potentially going with higher seeding rates as well to increase competition.
And put that down to grass, Jimmy. Does that come into the reckoning here?
Yeah, absolutely. In where you have a very severe infestation, um, and it's there for more than a year. Like if it's not the first time it's been identified and the infestation is severe, I think grass is probably the only viable option. You're looking at potentially up to 50% reduction in your yield in a very severe infestation. Cropping it probably isn't really viable. So grass for 5 years at a minimum, I would suggest, in order to ensure that you have depleted the weed seed bank before going in with a crop.
Jimmy, there's an awful lot more questions I would like to ask you about blackgrass and some of the other grass weeds in terms of how we control it, especially on the run into harvest. But for the moment, from what I can get from you, guys need to get out there. They need to identify what's in front of them. If it's some of the really difficult weeds to control, the likes of blackgrass, they need to make up their mind. I suppose get a 5-year plan together, and crop destruction may well be the best thing they can do in certain circumstances. But Jimmy, we're going to leave it for this episode of the podcast, and we might come back and chat again in the run up to harvest to give people an idea how to set up, I suppose, their farms, their combines, their machinery to prevent and further prevent maybe some of that seed return.
Yeah, no problem, Michael. Thanks for having me.
That's it for the Tillage Edge for this week, and my thanks to Jimmy for joining me on the podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.